Good morning and welcome. My name is Dr. Jane Neapolitan, and I'm the Assistant Provost for Academic Innovation. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to thank those who helped make this conference possible. Plans for this event have been in the works for nearly a year. The January conference has become a major, early frog throat, I apologize. The January conference has become a major collaborative event on our campus that connects theory with practice and celebrates excellence in teaching. We are grateful to the many staff and faculty that undertook leadership roles in the planning process. And in particular, I'd like to thank our two co-chairs from the Office of Academic Innovation, LaTanya Dyer and Audrey Cutler. They are the grand masters of putting this together. And they did a wonderful job, and I just trust their judgment very, very much so. So it's really been a leadership experience for them and for me. I would also like to thank the people who were in the planning and support, the people who did things behind the scenes. Tammy Adams from the Office of Academic Innovation did all the registration, and she also worked with Susan Brown from Black and Gold Catering. I'd like to thank Joe Brightman, Mary T. Casterline, Tiffany Henley, and David Marino, who is our videographer today. We had a number of subcommittees, so this has evolved. Rather than one office doing the bulk of the planning, we've now created subcommittees and other panels who are empowered, commissioned to go ahead and make the decisions and to do all the vetting of the wonderful presentations that you'll be hearing from the 27 people that Tim mentioned. The student panel was organized by Bonnie Brown from Educational Technology and Literacy. The program and proposal subcommittee co-chairs were David Dahl from the library and Dr. Sarah Gunning from English. The interactive rooms, please take time to go to the interactive room to find out about how faculty are using particular tools in their teaching. That was organized by Jamie Harden and Dr. Naya Vertz. And finally, the subcommittee members who did the heavy lifting in terms of evaluating, evaluating all of the projects. Lenida Crawford from Music, Sarah Crest from Cook Library, Dr. Laurencia Hutton-Rogers from Health Science, Dr. Colin Ebasher from Foreign Languages, Kate Eggleseder, sorry about the pronunciation, from Occupational Therapy, Jeremy Farkas from the College of Business and Economics, Claire Holmes from Cook Library, Dr. Chris Jensen from Civic Engagement and Leadership, Yang Yun Ji from Management, Dr. Abby Mello from Psychology, Kimberly Miller, Cook Library Research, Carl Osen, Cook Library Research, Dr. Layla Richmond, Special Education, and Ms. Bridget Sullivan from Art and Design. Folks, if you're here, would you please stand up and be acknowledged? It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the 2015 January conference. Dr. Lee Knefelkamp is Professor Emerita of Psychology and Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. She is also a Senior Fellow in the Office of Integrative Liberal Learning and the Global Commons at the Association of American Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. She holds a BA from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota in comparative literature. She earned both an MA and PhD from the University of Minnesota in counseling psychology, having served in the Peace Corps between her undergraduate and graduate education. Dr. Knefelkamp is no stranger to the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. She began her journey as a teacher in higher education at the University of Maryland, College Park, where she established the Counseling and Student Development Program, serving as program chair and department chair. After College Park, she then moved on to serve as Dean of the School of Education at the American University in Washington, D.C., and the Academic Dean and Professor of Psychology at her alma mater, Macalester College. At Teachers College in New York City, Dr. Knefelkamp served as Professor of Psychology and Education in the program of Social Organizational Psychology. At TC, she served as Professor and Program Chair of Adult and Higher Education and co-designer and director of the Eisenhower Leadership Development Master's Program for the United States Military Academy. Dr. Knefelkamp has received numerous awards for her scholarly work and teaching excellence. I recommend that you just go to the AACNU website and you'll be able to read up on her many accomplishments. She also has 3 honorary PhDs and 1 college medal. The Distinguished Scholar Teacher Award from University of Maryland for Distinguished Research and Teaching. There are many of you here who graduated from University of Maryland, so you know that that award is something extremely prestigious. And she also has the Carnegie Foundation National Faculty Salute Award for Distinguished Research and Teaching, a very high distinction with only 5 awards made nationally each year. Finally, Dr. Knefelkamp has made numerous national keynote addresses to national organizations, and she has the travel luggage to show for it, and the wardrobe also. She has written numerous publications in national journals on student, intellectual, ethical, identity, and intercultural development, and numerous articles on faculty development and curricular development. All of these areas being of great interest to us here today at what will become the January Learning Conference. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Knefelkamp to Towson University.
Okay. I brought my clock. My great mentor, Bill Perry, used to say that the mind can absorb only what the fanny can endure. This is really stunning. I had the great privilege this year of serving on the review committee to select all the presentations for the American Association of Colleges and Universities centennial annual meeting this January, and I have to tell you, that organization's got nothing on you. This is really, really impressive, and I couldn't agree more with your president. There are 2 things we know faculty can do. They can learn and they can teach. And with the exception of me, you don't need the outside consultants. But this is stunningly impressive, and I too want to add my words of thanks to the scores of people, the planning, the reviewing, the organization of all the logistics. You've created such a generative learning culture. And the people who joined me last night for dinner was just one of the most pleasant, welcoming things. It's great to be at Towson. It really is. College Park's cool, but Towson's really a happening lady, as Bette Midler would say. So. And it's a great pleasure to come home, actually, to this whole area. Maxine Green, who sadly we lost just this last year, was one of the preeminent, premier, stunning scholar philosophers of our time, probably of anyone's time. She's referred to at Teachers College with great love as the female John Dewey. I like to think of John Dewey as the male Maxine Green. And one of the books that I would recommend, and I want to salute Maxine Green using her as sort of the organizing structure this morning. No one loved teaching and learning more. And one of her favorite quotes was, "There are no answers, only questions." And one of the books that I would recommend that she wrote that is really about all of us and what we do is called The Dialectic of Freedom. and how the dialogue, the learning dialogue between and among students and faculty and peers is really the dialogue of freedom. And so I take the title of my address from something that she said a number of years ago. She wrote, identity, like education, is always in the making, forever incomplete, and full of infinite possibilities. Always in the making, forever incomplete, full of infinite possibilities. And I think for all the debate and the controversies and everything else around higher education these days in the United States, we can see the infinite possibilities, and that there has been an emerging consensus over the years about what education for a 21st century should be. In fact, there's been an emerging consensus of our surveys, and we'll be releasing another major national survey next week at AAC&U's meeting, an emerging consensus from students and from faculty and from employers about what is needed for a 21st century education. Over 90% of students, faculty, and employers say that we need teamwork skills for people to work in diverse groups. Over 75% say that we need increased critical thinking and analytical skills. Over 75% say that we need intercultural competence and teamwork in diverse groups. Over 70% say that we need more understanding of the role of education and its relationship to citizenry and who it is that we are as a people, and why education, public or private, is public for the public good. This is a stunning moment where we don't have to play the education versus jobs or the careerism versus liberal education game anymore. We are saying this is for the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the people that are employing our students, and those of us who are teaching our students, and our students themselves are saying we need these skills. That's a stunning kind of moment, full of extraordinary possibility. But it seems to me that the real question then isn't so much what do we need for a 21st century education, although some of us would quibble about that in terms of how many courses in our discipline would be necessary. But the real question for me, the possibility-raising question, is how will we achieve this? How will we achieve this? How will we do our best to make the environment, the educational environment, something that is excellent and excellent for all? And how will we continue to define excellence not as exclusion, but as continuous inclusion for more and more of us and our voices? And how will we really then deliver the education that people say is necessary for the 21st century? And content is obviously critical. I deeply love my own academic discipline. But you will notice that what the employers and the students and faculty are emphasizing is not so much the content of a major, although all of us would suggest that those are good things, right? But they're suggesting other kinds of processing, intellectual, intercultural, developmental skills that should come through the study of any major or through the experience of any program on a college campus. So today I'd like to, using Maxine's great phrase of infinite possibilities, explore 5 sort of infinite possibilities as I see them about United States higher education today. And the first is that I think our campuses and universities are what I would call the new American common. Now, when I was a little girl, after my father was killed in Korea, I was sent to live with my grandparents. And my grandmother, who was from England, and even though she lived in America for the vast majority of her life, died still having a queen, would dress me up. Some of you that know me are going to love this image. in my black patent leather shoes and my dress with a pinafore and white gloves and take me to the Boston Common. And it was a magical place for me at the time. And in fact, every time I go to Boston, I have to go to the Common. I have to see the Shaw Memorial, the Civil War Memorial, and I have to see the Make Way for Ducklings. They're just two things that one must do in life. But my grandmother always emphasized to me sort of the history of the English Common and then the Boston Common, and that it was a place of community. It was a place of enormous diversity. Increasingly diversity as the democracy became increasingly a democracy. And it was a place that people gathered. They gathered for protection, they gathered for community, they gathered for social learning, and they gathered for gossiping, they gathered for all those kinds of things. And I believe colleges and universities now are the new American common. If you think about all the different places where people spend time, we are the most diverse. We are the American common. We are welcoming generation after generation, different age groups, global, ethnic, racial, socioeconomic class. We are the new American common. There is no other institution in our society that has as its goal the welcoming of all of us coming together for a common purpose and common learning. That is extraordinary. And what an extraordinary privilege it is to be a part of that. And in accepting the fact that we are privileged to be a part of that, what are the moral and ethical obligations we have to create the commons with more equity, with more excellence, and more invitation for all? Maxine Greene referred to this kind of space as what she called the authentic public space. The authentic public space. And she suggested in all her work that it requires absolute meticulous consciousness. That to be in an authentic public space requires the conscious asking of the questions. What is possible? What ought to be? And what ought we to do to make it better? What is possible? What ought to be? And what ought we to do to make it better? Well, this requires the best of our moral, our ethical, and our intellectual thinking. It requires a kind of discernment of this public space and how it can be designed and used and lived in and shared. I believe every classroom on the campus is that authentic public space. I believe every advising office, the career development center, the clubs that are going on, the off-campus community learning activities that so many of you are involved in, the way we use media, those are all authentic public spaces. And they need to be places where we attend to one another with interest, with regard, with sincerity, with respect, and with care. Maxine Greene talked about the authentic public spaces as places, and I loved this, of intersecting narratives. The stories you all bring, the stories you all bring, the stories you all are. I wrote an article once called "The Curriculum is Actually the Collective Autobiography of the Faculty." And that when you start tinkering with the curriculum, you're tinkering with our souls. And so we should be very careful if we're on curriculum committees. There was a wonderful, wonderful woman, the like of Maxine Greene. Her name was Mary Gwen Owen. She was the first tenured woman at Macalester College. And she was like Auntie Mame. She was an experience. And she headed the drama department, and you would have known that whether you knew what her title was or not. And she used to bounding across the small campus mall in a red cloak in the winter that was made of wool and a red cloak in the summer that was made of cotton. She drank brandy and smoked cigars in her basement office beneath the theater. She was my advisor until she saw me in acting class and called me in and suggested that it wasn't just that I was so nervous I threw up before acting. It was that the professor saw me and threw up afterwards. That I had no sense of humor or timing, and perhaps I should do something useless like go into political science. I didn't. I went into comparative literature. But she taught a course called Drama Chorus, based on the great Greek drama choruses, and it was this extraordinary experience of being a part of Drama Chorus, because she took us all, whether we were talented or not, and turned us into this public, recitation group. And she was the first person to introduce Langston Hughes to the campus, and Maya Angelou, and all sorts of other kinds of people that hadn't been in the Macalester campus. This was a campus that's gen ed course was called Man and His World. Well, you know a little bit about her story now, just 30, 40 seconds worth. But if you look at the catalog, it just says Drama Chorus, Spring, 3 credits. You start tinkering with the curriculum, and I think we should tinker with the curriculum. That's how I got tenure. But you are tinkering with real people's stories, with real people's souls. And one of the questions is, how do we create the curriculum for the 21st century that honors all those autobiographies and all the new autobiographies that we are inviting into the community? And that's not at all an easy thing to do, because in our classrooms and on our campuses and in our activities, we are interacting narratives of faculty, of our disciplines, of our students, of our increasingly diverse student body, and we're interacting in the context of 2 very critical things: history, and the present crises that we all face. Just think about the crucible that is in France now. It is, of course, everywhere. It is across the street. But we have been riveted to CNN for the past week or so. And think about how different peoples and different individuals' histories, backgrounds, cultures, religions, experience have affected how they interpret what appears to be the same event. And how important it is for our students to understand that they are coming to these events, and we are coming to these events in those interacting narratives. On a much less serious note, but one that as an interculturalist amused me no end, and some of you probably saw this last week in the Washington Post, 2 individuals, a mother and a daughter, had produced a book about military children and helping them cope with all the things. Now, I'm a military brat. I went to 13 different grade and junior high schools and 3 different high schools before I escaped to Macalester. And the controversy was all about the fact that they had changed the name military brat to military terrific young people who are surviving disruption or something like that. And this was the thing that caught me. They didn't have the right to do that, according to legions of military brats, because they weren't in the military. They didn't belong to the Klan. I thought, wow. We're talking about a book that was written to try to help young kids like myself make sense out of the world, and the book has now been pulled because they usurped something that was perceived as belonging to somebody else's culture. So how do we deal with those intersecting narratives from the sublime to the ridiculous? Secondly, 4 possibilities. I think that colleges and universities are a space of engagement, connection, integration, and application. John Dewey, the great patron saint of Teachers College. So much our patron saint that those of you I know that have been there remember that his bust is in the right there when we walk in the front door through the arches. And the tradition at Teachers College, by the way, is to touch his bust before you have your oral exam or a big test or something like that. And so we have the bust of John Dewey and the nose of Richard Nixon, basically, in the lobby. But after he leaves Chicago in the lab school, feeling that he's a failure, he comes to New York, and there's something about the energy of New York and the immigrant population and the diversity, not that Chicago obviously didn't have all those things as well, but at this moment in his life coming to New York, being significantly influenced by the Harlem Renaissance, he writes for the first time in his Education and Identity essays that the central purpose of education is to create in our students and in ourselves, very communal, in our students and in ourselves, the capacities for associative living, the capacities for living in an increasingly recognized as complex democracy. And so we ask ourselves, what are the intellectual capacities, the interpersonal capacities, the moral and the ethical capacities, the intercultural capacities that we need for associative living in an increasingly diverse campus population, classroom population, national population, and global population. Right. And because we are smart enough to know that just being in each other's presence isn't necessarily being present to the other, we have to really ask ourselves, what can we do to more deliberately foster engagement, connection, integration, and application? Well, Dewey suggested that learning would never be effective unless the individual learner could connect the concrete experiences of his or her own life to the subject that they were studying, and vice versa. The subject informing and the student critiquing. Right? That unless that connection with the concrete vicissitudes of our own history and standpoint and positionality and experience and culture, unless that was connectable to what we were studying, the learning would not last. It would always remain learning about the other and how important that is. But can we learn about the other and ourselves simultaneously? That's the dialogue of freedom. That's the dialectic of freedom. That's what needs to go on between experience and theory, theory and experience, practice and theory. And Dewey suggested further that needed to be done two ways. And we're the perfect people for it, folks. It needed to be done two ways. One, through what he called active reflection. And this was an important thing for Dewey. Reflection, and he wrote this, with and in the sight of one's peers. That one can do individual reflection, a good thing to do. But that active reflection involved engagement. Maybe it's engagement with the author that you won't get to meet, but you can get to know. But it's also engagement with your friends, with your family, with your peers. And the second way that he said that needed to be done was then to go out and actively try to test knowledge in the world. If you've learned something, is it useful? And how can I make it useful? But not just is it useful for some argument's sake, but am I useful in the use of that knowledge? How can I be useful in knowing what I know? And every discipline then, if you think what's going on just in France right now, there is not a discipline on this campus that doesn't have a position or a set of positions or perspectives that can inform our understanding of those complexities. Every discipline is necessary to understand. Every discipline. can allow us to be useful. So how do we design such spaces so that connection and engagement and integration and application take place? I had the great privilege of spending 2 weeks in Greece this summer to celebrate my retirement. And in 1966, I had gone to Greece in my quest to study further and to follow in the footsteps of Nikos Kazantzakis, who many of you may know as the author of Zorba the Greek, The Last Temptation of Christ, and the Odyssey, a modern sequel, etc., etc. And he had written a book called Journey Through the Morea, and so my honors thesis was built on following his journey through his own country, which he did at the same time that I was doing it, to try to put that together in some of my own understanding. And I ended up in Crete, and I ended up being able to stay with his family. He had actually died just a couple of years before. And he wrote Zorba as his academic autobiography, even though we associate the Odyssey, a modern sequel, much later with that. He was a young college student. He had finished several years at the university, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He felt disengaged from the material. And he did, in fact, go to an island, and he did, in fact, meet Griegos Zorba. And Griegos Zorba did, in fact, spend those months that you see depicted in either the movie or you see in the book. And he had been struggling. He had been struggling, like so many of our students struggle, with what it is he should learn and who it was he should be. His father had been a freedom fighter in Crete, a member of the military. His mother was a musician and an intellectual. He had studied many different religions. His father told him he should be one kind of a man. His mother told him he should be another. The many pieces of himself in terms of his religion, explorations that he had in terms of his own sexuality, and his own political thoughts and feelings. He was a series of dots, yet unconnected. Yet unconnected. And in the course of the experiential education that he has with Zorba, and Zorba asking him extraordinary philosophical questions through that whole time, Zorba is not necessarily the hedonistic person that we think. One of the questions being, why did the young die? Why does anybody die? And he answers, I don't know. And Zorba says, if you don't know that, what's the use of all your goddamn books? What do they tell you? And he answers, they tell me of the agony of men who cannot answer questions like yours. But at the end of this experience, he resolves to go back to the university. He resolves to become a writer. And the integration of these split parts of his soul, these disconnected dots, get united in one sentence. I too can be a warrior, but my soldiers will be the 26 letters of the alphabet. That's the kind of space we need to be. They don't have to go to Crete. I recommend it, but they don't have to. That's the kind of space we need to be. That the connection between the concrete experience of their lives and what we have to teach and what we have to learn and what we have to dialogue about together can help knit not just the integrated learning dots of how we put interdisciplinary courses together, but the integrated learning dots of how we put real people together, or recognize that they're already put together and we can learn from them. A third space of infinite possibility I would suggest to you this morning is a space of recognition. Recognition. In that first year at Macalester College, Naha Armajani, who was a professor of history and who had come to Macalester himself as an undergraduate from Iran, told us this story. And I didn't get it then. I was 18, it was my second day on campus. I didn't get it then. But I think I get it now. He told of growing up poor in Iran, coming to Macalester on a scholarship, and that when he was a little boy living in the very dry part of Iran in which he lived, his daily job was to take several pails and go to try to gather clean water for the family. And he was taught by his imam, and he was taught by his family and by his tradition, that running water was clean. And so he would look for the stream that was running, and he would sometimes walk miles and miles before he could find this, particularly in the dry season. But that was his daily job, and his family depended on his doing that right and well and successfully. And when he came to Macalester, his first course was a chemistry course. And one day they went out to collect water. And they collected water in the sewers, the gutters. They collected water in the Mississippi River. They collected water at Minnehaha Falls. Collected water out of the taps in the residence halls. They were dormitories then, but in the residence halls. And they put them all under the microscope. And the running water was contaminated in every sample. And what he said at the end of the story was, he didn't just have a crisis of intellect. He had a crisis of faith. Well, the curriculum, the college experience is kind of like that. It's the Trojan horse. You think you're taking chemistry, and you're moving into the deepening unknown. I thought I was taking first year English, and we read The Bridge over San Luis Rey. And then the next week, President Kennedy was assassinated. I think they're messing with my mind. When Bill Perry wrote his famous book, Forms of Intellectual and Ethical Development in the College Years, A Scheme, the largest title of any developmental book I've ever seen, he said he used, and it's 9 phases of intellectual complexity and increasing maturation, and one that has told us a great deal for the last 60 years about how students think and how students learn, and certainly changed my life in all the years that I had the privilege of working with him. But he said the background for this developmental odyssey, as the student went through different positions of complexity and engagement with the world. You remember Odysseus goes out and goes away and then comes home and realizes you can't come home again. He said the metaphor for the intellectual odyssey was the actual odyssey. And that he thought the curriculum was like the sirens in the islands. You're out at sea and they're calling you and they promise you a safe haven. If you don't learn to negotiate them, you'll be dashed upon the rocks. Think of the courage it takes to be a student, much less the courage it takes to be an educator. Because sometimes they think we do know. And we know the dirty little secret, don't we? Well, that's the poem that you have on your table, but I thought I would share it with you and read it with you. Adrienne Deutsch was sitting in her editor's office in New York, and while she was waiting for the appointment, she looked behind her, and in one of those old-fashioned bookcases with the glass front, she sees the World Book Encyclopedia, complete edition, 1928. Organized knowledge in story and picture confronts through dusty glass an eye grown dubious. I can recall when knowledge still was pure, not contradictory, pleasurable, as cutting out a paper doll. You opened up a book, remember these days, people, when you were young? You opened up a book, and there it was. Everything, just as promised. From Kurdistan to Mormons, Gum Arabic to Kumquat, neither more nor less. Facts could be kept separate by a convention. My favorite line, that's what made childhood possible. Now knowledge finds me out in all its risible untidiness. It traces me to each address, dragging in things I never thought about. I don't invite what facts can be held at arm's length. A family of jeering irresponsibles always comes along, gypsy style, and there you have them all forever on your hands. Never pays. If I could still extrapolate the morning glory on the gate from Petersburg in history, but it's too late. So we are needing to be, it seems to me, not only encouraging growth in our students and in ourselves, but sharing in the costs of growth. Every forward movement has us leaving something behind. And one of the struggles is how do we keep the parts of ourselves that we need to keep as we move forward? And how do we particularly recognize the courage that takes for so many of our first generation college students, our immigrant college students, and even our international college students, whose families have sacrificed an enormous amount very often for them to be even able to attend one course, much less college or university. And yet the very families that have sacrificed so much to send them to university are afraid that they will lose them because they will become of the university. Part of my nomadic childhood was spent on a farm in Minnesota. My grandmother didn't want me anymore. They sent me someplace else. And I was a 4-H'er. In fact, I raised 4-H pigs. In fact, we didn't put this in the introduction, and I'm just wounded. I had the state champion Hampshire pig 4 years in a row. Screw the honorary degrees, that's a purple ribbon. I also rode horses. And the people there remember when I was young and rode horses. My sister now runs the family stables and horse farm. She's 10 years younger than I am. And so whenever I come home, she gets little sister's revenge. And it has an indoor riding ring that seats several thousand people, so I don't even get out of what I'm about to tell you in the winter. So she gets several of the horses, and she knows, of course, that I have not ridden since the last time she's put me through this torture. And so that I'm not very good anymore, and I don't bounce the way I used to. But the word goes out, like Caesar Augustus, that Lee's back, and the neighbors gather and sit on the straw bales at the end of the arena and have coffee and cookies and watch. And after about the third horse has thrown me or other unpleasant things that the animal will do to me, and the neighbors have finished the coffee and cookies, my sister takes the horses away, and I sort of stagger over to the hay bales. And now it's Mrs. de Klerk that asks the question. It used to be her husband, Eddie. And here's the question. How are they treating you out there? Terribly proud of my success. How are they treating you out there? And I have to put my hands in my pockets and say, well, don't you know, it's not so good as being home, but it's pretty good. It's okay. And now I am back in the tribe. Now I am back in the family. Now I can come home. Well, there's not an international student that I have interviewed in my entire time at Teachers College that didn't have a similar story. You act too American, you're dressing differently. Have you lost your values? Listen to what we hear from our first generation students, people that are breaking class barriers just by stepping on the campus. People for whom this campus is as foreign a culture, right, as any international destination could possibly be. Adults who are coming back. Right? How is it that we help them negotiate all the possibilities of who we can help them be, and at the same time recognize the critical kind of challenge and support that that represents in who we are? Right? We are the sirens. And how is it that we help students realize then that they matter, that we will pay attention to their issues, that their success is important to our success, that we identify with them, that we depend on them, not because attendance is required, but because the dialectic needs it, and that we appreciate them. How does this become, how does your classroom become, how does my classroom become a place in which they matter, they belong, and they don't have to leave any part of themselves at the gate or at the door in order to be legitimate in the room or on the campus? If they matter, then the fourth possibility becomes a possibility. And that is that we are a space to engage the conflicts. Not just a space to engage the intellectual differences that we have, although those can be pretty significant conflicts, but the space to engage what my colleague at Teachers College has referred to as intractable conflicts. This is Peter Coleman's work in conflict. Intractable conflicts. Those conflicts that, in fact, will not be resolved, but can perhaps be better understood. But we live in a tension, it seems to me, on our college campuses, and particularly in our classrooms or advising offices or the people that are working in student affairs groups, right? Between wanting our students to listen to really understand each other and, by implication, themselves, and also wanting it to be a place of civility. And how do we strike the balance? Too much civility and we're not engaging the conflicts. Too much conflicted engaging and we're not being civil. Right? And one of the great, great tensions that we see in virtually every area of our society. Look at the discussions about race and policing. And just pick your topic. How do we not avoid the conflicts or assume that they can always be resolved, but accept the responsibility, have a resolute commitment to engage them so that students will interrogate their own perspective, their own positionality, their own point of view, and the point of view of the other, and not fall into the trap that engagement is agreement, because it's not. In fact, I may find out why I even disagree more because we have engaged. That's a tough one, and I think that is an increasingly tough one in the bifurcations that we see in the society all around us, in news reports and in the media, and those kinds of things. So how can we create the dialectic of freedom? That dialogue of understanding that doesn't presume the end result is agreement, but does require a depth of insight and understanding about self and others that can, in fact, be life-changing and transforming. I was struck again in reading Eudora Welty's beginning book about her autobiography about her life as a writer. And she divided it into 3 phases. And I think those are 3 phases that we could think very deeply about in the conference on learning and teaching and learning. And she said first she had to learn how to listen. One writer's beginnings begins with her memory of listening to her parents rustling around making breakfast downstairs. Then she had to learn to see. And only then could she find her own voice. So the space to engage in conflicts is part of the dialectic of freedom. And that dialectic is meant, of course, to free not just the other, but ourselves. If those four possibilities are possible, and I think they are, then the fifth possibility is that we are a place, an infinite place, where we can be of use. I honor you who accept what Nadine Gordimer has called the moral obligation, the essential moral gesture of finding a way to be educators. You've found a way, your way, in your style, in your discipline, in the daily work that you do, to act on the knowledge you have of who you are and how you struggle to know who the students are and how you commit yourselves to help them learn more deeply and better. And how you help them, I think, particularly with the values and the history of this campus, to use that knowledge for others in citizenry. Well, Marge Percy wrote a wonderful poem about that. I have it here laminated because it goes with me everywhere in my wallet, or billfold, or whatever you call those things. Right next to my credit card and a picture of my mother. To be of use. This is for you. The people I love the best jump into work headfirst, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black sleek heads of seals bouncing in half-submerged water. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, to do what has to be done again and again and again. I want to be with people who submerged in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Love that line. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well, done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphora for wine and oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are now put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries out for water to carry, and the person for work that is real. Thank you.
Well, what can I say? Lee, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to reflect on the taken for granted realities that are before us and with us every day. And sometimes it does take a person from the quote outside to come and bring it to our attention in such a very eloquent and engaging way. On behalf of Towson University, I want to present you with this copy inside, a paperback copy of the history of Towson University, written by Dean Esslinger, who is Professor Emeritus here at Towson. We were talking about history last night, and because we are now coming into our anniversary year, it's equally important for us to reflect on who we are, what we value, and where we want to go for the future. So I just wanted to say again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.